Not often enough, right?
Agreed.
That's exactly
I think
right.
we have some preconceived notions as to why we don't talk about that one. So I'm sure Lee is going to break us through on some of those myths tonight.
Exactly.
Indeed.
Well, we are right at 6:30, and we always like to start on time and end on time, given that it is a weekday and we don't know how everyone's weeks have gone, but I hope that all of you are doing fantastic. I'm Adrienne Lance, Adrienne Lance Lucas, almost forgot my own name, president of the National Alumni Association of Spelman College for the Atlanta chapter. And we're so thrilled to have some of you back this evening and some of you joining us for the first time. This is our Wealthy Wednesday Women's Series that we do in collaboration with Bank of America. And it has been tremendous. We have set out to do a 10-month series, one every month on a Wednesday, just to learn about investing. We learned about the basic principles. We have learned about tax strategies. We've done that twice to kind of amp us up, getting ready for the tax season. So hopefully all of you filed yesterday and made that deadline because it was extended. We've also, based on this series, have launched into a finance club for Spelman women to actually put the things that we're learning to practice. And so we are thrilled this evening to be joined again by Tiffany Eubanks Saunders, our Senior Vice President or Executive Marketing representative from Bank of America. And we're also joined by Lee Parker, who is going to take us on a journey tonight. And we're going to talk about philanthropy and how you can address your own investing to causes that you like, but also if you want to set up a family foundation, we'll get into some of those things as well, how you can consider that. So I am going to pause and turn it over to you, Tiffany, to do further introductions of Lee, and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Adrienne. And it's so good to be with you and the lovely ladies who are alumnus of the prestigious Spelman College. It's always great to be with you ladies, and today is no different. And as Adrienne mentioned, we've been on this journey together over the last several months. And our objective is quite simple. It is to try to create education and awareness for us, women of color, Black women, simply because it's not something that is targeted to us typically. It's not an area of focus. Most of us didn't grow up learning about how to create wealth or generational wealth, and many of us have not necessarily been exposed even in our adult life and during our income generating years. And so that's really the purpose of this series. As Adrienne mentioned, I am joined today by one of my colleagues, Lee Parker, who is located in the Washington, D.C. area. And Lee is a specialist in her own right. She is part of one of the organizations within our Bank of America private bank that really focuses on helping our clients, both families as well as institutional clients, many of which happen to be HBCUs, helping them take the funds that they have and manage them so that they can be leveraged for further support of different types of causes, many of which are charitable causes. And so as Adrienne mentioned, we always like to talk about having a passion for giving, but giving with a purpose. And the reality is how you give is part of your wealth creation strategy that most of us don't ever consider as a form of investment. But the reality is there's a lot of benefit associated with setting aside dollars, a lot of tax benefit associated with setting aside the dollars that we want to leverage to bestow blessings upon others and really lean into contribute to the causes that are near and dear to our heart, that can also not only serve us from a philanthropic and giving perspective, but also help us as it relates to making the most out of the income that we're creating and the wealth that we're trying to generate. So I'm not going to speak any further. I'm going to turn it over to the expert and my colleague, Ms. Lee. We worked together on a number of projects together, and I couldn't be any more proud to introduce her knowledge and expertise to you all. And I think Lee's got a couple of slides we'll go through. You ladies do a great job of asking questions in the chat as we go through the conversation. And so as usual, we'll do that tonight, and I'll just interject so that Lee can answer and address questions as we go along. And we'll try to leave a couple of minutes at the tail end before the half of the hour to answer any additional questions that you all may have. So with that, Lee, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tiffany. It is a pleasure to be with you ladies this evening. I feel as though it is a privilege to speak to you, as well as to share my passion for giving, essentially philanthropy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background so that you understand the context that I bring to this presentation. And then we'll start moving through the slides. So as Tiffany said, I am a philanthropic client manager at Bank of America Private Bank. And before I joined the private bank, I spent over 2 decades working with regional and also local community foundations, helping individuals to think about how they want to give, what they want to give to, and to define those strategies. And part of that journey brought me to Bank of America and working with the bank to bring that same expertise in really helping people to figure out how to actualize their giving passion. And as Tiffany said, how to also achieve their financial goals through that giving. So as a philanthropic client manager, I physically sit in Washington, D.C., and I work with our not-for-profit clients, family foundations, and other not-for-profits to help them to achieve their missions, not just through investment management, but really bringing the whole breadth and depth of Bank of America, whether that be credit, whether that be thought leadership, that will, again, help those families and those institutions achieve their missions. So what I'm going to bring to you this evening is going to be a marriage between my expertise, my personal journey through giving, and then also what I know around best practices and research that will help you to think about when you conceptualize giving. How can giving be tied with achieving your financial goals? So let's start our conversation and our journey through understanding 2 pieces of, if you will, this conversation. Let's understand, and someone said it very earlier on in the conversation, let's understand what Black philanthropy really looks like, because there's a misnomer in our community that we don't give and we aren't philanthropic. Well, in fact, ladies, we are hugely philanthropic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the second piece is, what are the methods, what are the tools that you can use to facilitate your giving interest, to fulfill your giving passions? And then, as Tiffany said, we'll open it up for questions, but please feel free at any point to pause me throughout to ask any questions. So with that being said, I'm going to pause and then ask if the presentation could be put up on the screen. And we'll see if that can be done or if I need to do that.
Okay, let's see.
And while Adrian is
Not coming up, Tiffany, why don't you, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and drive it, Tiffany.
Okay.
Okay.
on
Perfect.
your end. And just as you're doing that and getting started, I want to just echo and let you know this conversation is so timely because we finished commencement and reunion. And during our reunion times, classes pool their dollars together in order to make their philanthropic contributions to the college. And this year, it has been a record year, which you wouldn't expect during the pandemic. We had the class of 71 gave over $5 million over the past 5 years. In my class of 1990 gave 800,000 for the classes ending in zeros and fives. And so I wanted to make sure that we mention that because the listening is going to be different just based on the timing today.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations. I am thrilled to hear that. And you're right, our conversation couldn't be more timely. Now, let me ask, can you see the slide up on the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So let's talk about the state of African American philanthropy. And I think we all are very familiar with philanthropy in the sense that it means the love of mankind and it means giving of our time, talents, and resources. And it's funny, when I entered into professional philanthropy, my father said, "Lee, what is that exactly? I don't understand philanthropy." And when I defined it for him as what you do on a daily basis, in writing a check to a not-for-profit, and giving of his resources, whether they be tangible or not, he understood that. And the conversation that I had with my father is that let's understand that philanthropy giving really started decades ago. And that really began and is rooted in the tradition of, as I said, giving, caring, and sharing that was part of the West African culture before colonialism. And that sense of giving transferred or extended into the Black church. And we are all part of Black churches where the idea of giving is rooted in the essence of the Black church. And that is where many of us learn the culture and breathe the culture of giving. And this vibrant landscape of giving within the Black community is not just about money, as I've said before, but also includes how we have been giving of our time and our know-how. And what's really important to recognize is that the extent to which the Black community gives totals over $11 billion on an annual basis. Let me repeat that, $11 billion. So when anyone says that we as a community are not philanthropic, that cannot be farther from the truth. And we have actually been philanthropic, as I just shared with you, for centuries. So when we think of giving, we should really be proud of the heritage of giving that we as women and we as the Black community are still experiencing today. So let's talk about, what do we give to? And there's a report by the name of Diversity in Giving, the Changing Landscape of American Philanthropy, that helps us to understand what giving looks like in the African American community. And as you can guess, there's a large percentage of our giving that goes to our place of worship. So about 75% of African American giving is directed towards the place of worship. Second are social service organizations, with a high percentage given to youth development programs, about 40% of people's giving. And then children's welfare is third, health organizations. And I'm sure you're not surprised that anti-racism and anti-hate organizations also receive a good percentage of our giving. And I expect with the reports that are soon to come out around giving related to COVID-19, that anti-racism and anti-hate organizations will probably tick higher up on this hierarchy. But that just kind of gives you a picture, and I don't think it's necessarily surprising, and it may actually be reflective of your personal giving. Now let's think about, how do we give? And by gender, I'm very proud to say that the greater percentage of giving happens through us, women, and where you have 54% versus 46%. And then in those married households, we find that women are the primary decision makers when it comes to philanthropic giving decisions. Now, by generations, boomers give at a greater rate than other generations, where millennials and Generation X give at about 20% of their income. So they are at the lowest. And then above them, Generation X at 22%, and then boomers at 45%. Now, giving by share of median family wealth. I am again pleased to share that African Americans contribute the largest portion of our wealth in comparison to other racial groups. Now, some might be surprised by this because, as we know, and we've seen a lot of reports about the wealth disparities between African American households and then other groups. But despite that, and despite the structural barriers that have blocked our asset building and wealth building, regardless of what our net income is, we as a community are still very philanthropic. And in fact, we are giving not just of our cash, but also non-liquid assets such as cars, art, land, and stock. And that has been the case since 2010. Now I'm going to talk more about how you can give of non-liquid assets and again receive a financial benefit a little later in my presentation. So I talked a little bit about how we give in comparison to others, but I want to dig a little deeper. So imagine if you're sitting at a table just having a conversation and discussing, how is African American philanthropy different from white philanthropy, majority philanthropy? And I'll highlight a couple of things of note. African American households tend to give more of their discretionary income in comparison to white Americans, as much as 25% more. In addition, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we as a community have a higher family tradition of giving in comparison to white Americans. And then we are also more likely to encourage the younger generation, our younger relatives, sons, daughters, cousins, to get involved in charitable causes and to give, to be philanthropic. In addition, we find that African Americans, we give a lot of our time in the sense that we are part of multiple charitable causes, whether that is sitting on a board or volunteering. So those are just a couple of highlights to give you a sense of how we sit in comparison to others. Now, let's talk a little bit about the methods that we use to give, to be philanthropic. And I have bucketed them into institutionalized tools and informal tools. And when I say institutionalized, forms of philanthropy. So as you all probably may guess, that philanthropy has not always been as structured as it is today, such that the existence of family foundations and then also donor advised funds and what are called identity-based funds have really been present in the last several decades. Now, family foundations, I think those are self-explanatory. Donor advised funds, I'm going to get into in a little bit more detail there, but I want to hit identity-based funds at this point in the presentation because they are the newer type of institutionalized giving tools because they are designed for individuals to pool their gifts together. So think of the likes of a giving circle, think of the likes of a foundation affiliated with your sorority. Those are termed as identity-based funds that are focused on giving to the African American community, and they have become very, very popular, particularly to engage the donor regardless of, or the individual regardless of the level, the check amount that they can write. Now, in terms of informal tools, the obvious cash or check, and then also giving time and know-how. And what I know from experience as well as through research, African Americans tend to be more of a check writing philanthropist. Such that we are not using many of the tools, the institutionalized tools that could benefit both our charitable passion as well as our financial goals. And I want to get into that a little bit more because it's a missed opportunity that we as a community should really begin to take advantage of, that will focus us and put us further down that journey of building wealth. So I'm going to stop there to see if anybody has any questions before I go into a deeper dive around the various ways that you can structure your giving.
Haley, there was a question around creating family foundations and how does one go about creating a family foundation?
Awesome question. And whoever posed that, if you could just put a pin in it, I'm going to do a deeper dive as part of the structure you're giving component of the presentation.
Any other questions at this point, ladies, or should we move further? Okay, let's continue, Lee.
All right. So the slide in front of you details 5 different ways to give. And the tools that I'm going to spend a bit of time on are private foundations. So the question, Tiffany, that was just posed, how do you set up a private foundation and what do you need to think about and consider when you do that? I'm also going to hit charitable trusts as well as donor advised funds. So let's move into those, and I will hit private foundations last. So let's do a deep dive into charitable gift annuities. And these are very popular in the sense that it allows the person who sets up a charitable gift annuity to receive a fixed regular payment stream, as well as to provide a gift to their charity of choice, such that the charity receives the remaining principal corpus at the end of the annuitant's lifetime. So what you are able to do is to achieve 2 goals. One, the regular income, and you also make a commitment or a gift to the charity of your choice. And the nice part about that is that from a tax perspective, You see here that a portion of each annuity payment is treated as return of principal and therefore not taxed. So there are definite tax benefits to think about using a charitable gift annuity. A charitable remainder trust. This is a little different, where you have, similarly to the other tool, the charitable gift annuity, you have two beneficiaries, and one beneficiary is you. You receive a regular payment stream, and then when the trust terminates, the charitable beneficiary receives the remaining trust assets. Now, the distinction with this particular tool is that you notice at the bottom, it indicates it provides a means of managing capital gains tax on appreciated securities or assets by contributing these assets into the trust and then selling them. So the charitable gift annuity and then also the charitable remainder trust, they achieve dual benefits, but again, each of them is a little different. And I should say that in terms of a charitable gift annuity, there are multiple different types of organizations that can set up annuities. So for instance, you can go to your local community foundation as well as Bank of America, our Merrill partners or our Merrill arm, and work on setting up a charitable gift annuity. Now, let's dig a little deeper into donor advised funds. And the donor advised funds have been around for quite some time, but are not well known, or at least have not been well known in the last 5 years, but their sexiness, so to speak, has really picked up. And think about it this way. So for my husband and I, our income has increased over time. And when we think about the gifts that we want to make, sometimes he and I can't agree. Quite frankly, but we know that from a tax perspective, it would be beneficial for us to make gifts, a larger gift at one time. A donor advised fund allows us to set up a donor advised fund to then receive an immediate tax deduction. So then that way we can address our tax need. And then when we set up the donor advised fund, we become the advisor on that fund. So as we decide what we want to gift to, we can do so over time. Versus making that immediate decision at that point in time. And in addition to that, a donor advised fund allows you to contribute not just cash, securities, as well as other assets. So for instance, if I wanted to gift Bank of America stock that I own to a donor advised fund because I want to address any capital gains implications, a donor advised fund will allow me to do that. In addition, it also allows, let's say we want to keep the donor advised fund for quite some time and then allow my son to step in as a successor advisor. We can do that. And many people are thinking about donor advised funds as great options to setting up family foundations because it allows for, I would say, a less time-intensive and costly option from setup and maintenance perspective than in comparison to a family foundation. I'm going to get into that in just a second, which will answer the question around how do you set up a family foundation. But this next slide just goes into a bit more detail around what you can give to a donor advised fund that will allow you to receive a tax deduction. So you see stocks and other securities, privately held business interests, and other non-publicly traded assets. And what's important about this slide is that many people presume that you can only gift cash in order to receive the tax benefit. And as you see by this slide, that is not the case. Many people will also, what is not on here, will also gift art. And the value of that art can be used as a tax deduction. So this is in donor advised funds. Bank of America operates them, various financial institutions, community foundations, they're third-party providers that allow you to set it up with an institution that you are most comfortable with and that you want to work with over the short and then also over the long term. So let's get into private foundations. So what I'd like you to pay attention to is look at the distinction between a donor advised fund and also a private foundation. And I'm going to pay attention to a private foundation to answer the question around setup. So when you establish a private foundation, you are essentially establishing a not-for-profit corporation. That means that you have to put in place a board of directors, articles of incorporation, and also bylaws. In addition, once you establish, and you also have to get file your state incorporation papers. And once you have established those pieces, those policies, those formation documents, you then have to file them with the IRS to become a certified 501c3 with private foundation status. And once the IRS grants you that status, you are then a not-for-profit corporation whose mission must always align with the requirements as deemed by the IRS to be a 501c3. Now, beyond, I'm going to call it the base formation that I just described, you then have to fund your foundation and determine how you want to fund it. And you'll notice in that first row, as I said, with donor advised funds, you can use cash, publicly traded securities, and non-financial assets. But pay particular attention to the tax deductibility that you get from what you contribute to set up that private foundation. In addition, remember that when you set up a private foundation, you no longer have anonymity because on an annual basis, you must file what is called a 990-PF so that you certify for the IRS that you are in fact operating in accordance with their rules and regulations. And one of them is that on an annual basis, you must, under all circumstances, distribute 5% of the net income of the foundation. And you do have the flexibility to include gifts as well. When I say gifts, so grants to nonprofits, as well as administrative costs associated with running the foundation. And you will pay on an annual basis the excise tax. And if you do not distribute 5%, that year, or the IRS will give you until the next fiscal year, you will be penalized and can pay 2% or more in excise tax if you do not grant the 5%, or distribute the 5% on an annual basis. So I don't want to sound like I'm a Debbie Downer about private foundations, but I will say that I have many a conversation with clients who have, let's say, $300,000, $200,000, and they say, we want to set up a private foundation. And we will certainly do that. But what they don't consider is not just the setup associated with it, but also you've got to monitor it. You've got to staff it. So who's going to oversee the grant making? And these are all things that some of our clients, and you may be a person like this that does not want to worry about that. They want to enjoy the fun of making grants to charities that they care about. And they don't want to worry about the administrative requirements associated with private foundations. So this is where a donor advised fund meets both the passion as well as the financial goals of many of our clients. Now, I will also say that, let's say you decide that I'm going to start a private foundation. That's really what I want to do. But you may say 2 years down the line, I really don't want to continue to operate the foundation. I'm more interested in less, if you will, responsibility. And you can transition that private foundation into a donor advised fund. So you have the ability to transition that structure from the private foundation to a donor advised fund without any penalties. And the ease of doing it over the years has become so easy. So I can go into more details about what that would look like, but I'm going to stop there and in particular ask the person who asked about setting up a private foundation if what I've provided is helpful and if you have additional questions.
Yes, my name is Valerie. What you provided was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm happy to follow up with a piece that details in more specificity what are the step-by-step instructions for moving through the creation of a private foundation, and what do you need to think about as you're managing it. So if that would be helpful, I can share that with Tiffany.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Will do.
We had a couple of other questions that came into the chat. One is around donor advised fund. I think you've answered this, but just to clarify and make sure that we've addressed it. The question is, can you get the tax benefit even before the money has been spent or sent to the nonprofit? So even before the money has been distributed, since what we can see from the chart here is that you don't necessarily have to even have an annual distribution in a donor advised fund. So the question is, when do you receive the tax benefit for the funds that are being contributed? And then the next question or follow-up question to that is, the assets will remain in the fund until the advisor determines when and where to assign them.
Mm-hmm. So when you write let's say you are gifting cash, the day you make that gift to a donor advised fund provider, let's say it's the Community Foundation for Atlanta, and you want to set up a donor advised fund. The date that you write on that check and hand it over to the Community Foundation of Atlanta is the date the IRS identifies as you have made that contribution to a not-for-profit. And you can then take that tax deduction in that tax year. So when again, using the example of the Community Foundation for Atlanta or Greater Atlanta Community Foundation, when you set that up, The assets sit in that donor advised fund until you spend down the donor advised fund. And you can, when you set up the donor advised fund, to say to, again, using the community foundation, excuse me, you want to gift the remaining balance in the fund to the community foundation if you or your successor advisors pass away. If you do not authorize that gift to the community foundation, then it sits in that donor advised fund for perpetuity. Or again, as long as you have money in the donor advised fund. Now, I will also add on the setup side, there are many institutions that will allow you to make an initial gift to set up the donor advised fund, but will not allow you to grant money until it reaches a certain threshold. So for Bank of America, you have to, I believe, contribute $25,000 to set up a donor advised fund. Now at a community foundation, let's take the Greater Washington Community Foundation where I used to work, that threshold is $1,000. And every time you go below that threshold, you cannot grant from the donor advised fund. So there's a lot of flexibility that institutions like community foundations and Bank of America are providing to donors so that it gives the flexibility regardless of what size donor you are, meaning small, medium, or large, to set up a donor advised fund and use that vehicle for your gifting.
Great. So the next question, Lee, here is really just to expound upon publicly traded securities, which essentially we're talking about, stocks. And as you mentioned before, donors are eligible to actually place stocks into publicly traded stocks and mutual fund shares, so on and so forth, into their fund or their DAF or donor advised fund, and with the intent of being able to at some point gift that to a nonprofit or charitable organization. And to your point, the real benefit is that you don't have the capital gains impact on taxes that you would have if you were to take that stock, trade it in, and then take the proceeds. Instead, you increase your donation if you actually gift stock or publicly traded securities versus gifting cash. I will tell you, some people, some investors move to a strategy that pretty much says, 75% or greater of what they gift in terms of charitable contributions is done through those securities, just because it allows for you to gift at a higher rate without having to incur the capital gains tax in its share, related to the question here about publicly traded securities, and just the school of thought that I was going down in terms of some of the benefits of gifting that versus cash.
Yep, you are spot on, Tiffany. And we often advise our clients to think about publicly held securities as the best asset to gift due to the capital gains. And whether you are thinking about gifting those securities directly to a not-for-profit, the beauty is that not-for-profits have the ability to accept all sorts, an array of gifts. And as it relates to publicly held securities, they have the mechanisms by working like institutions like us to have those stocks liquidated or even held in their portfolio if they so choose.
Right.
And they are then able to use that to either build their endowment or to support their general operations. So what you're doing through that gift is you're fulfilling a charitable purpose, a charitable intent. You're getting a financial benefit. And by the way, you're actually, as Tiffany said, gifting the not-for-profit more than you would if you would have chosen to liquidate the stock yourself and then write a check or give cash to that not-for-profit because they're going to receive more because you are not going to have to pay more in order to make that gift. So that is, we have found across our institutional clients that not-for-profits are really advocating for their donors and prospective donors to think about gifting stock because it has such a high value of return for them. And it is so easy for a donor to do that. And quite frankly, it's much more comfortable because there's security associated with one financial institution transferring those stocks to a not-for-profit. So I would highly recommend thinking about that as part of your gifting approach.
Yeah, and I would say, Adrian, the whole notion, donor advised funds are really a bit of a newer phenomenon, if you will, particularly around communities of color and diverse segments that just have not really had exposure to them in the past. But they, as Lee shared in the comparison chart, not to say that a personal foundation or family foundation is not something that you should engage in, because a lot of times people will set those up because they want a sense of perpetuity around their legacy. And as long as you understand the administrivia that goes along with it, the cost structure that's associated with it, then it's a great way for you to continue to give, especially if it's for a certain purpose. And it's a great way for your family to have legacy. Barring that as an objective, donor advised funds are a great way to realize some immediate benefit, have a control over where you give, what you give, and not have to worry about or be burdened with some of the administrative management that's associated with giving to different organizations throughout time and over time. It may be something that at some point you all want to consider having a special workshop on or doing a real deep dive on, because what Lee's done is a great job of really kind of giving a good baseline understanding. But it really, as you hear us talking, hopefully what you're beginning to understand is that there's a real strategy that you can employ that allows you to give to the chair causes
Tiffany,
that are
I'm going to
most
ask you to
close to
repeat
you,
that.
most
It was
important to
going out
you,
just a
also
little bit.
provide.
Can you repeat that last part, Tiffany? It was going in and out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. You were
Can you
talking
hear,
about the
is that better?
strategy.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So what I was saying is you know, there's a real, there is a real stretching to the causes that are most important to you, but also giving to yourself at the same time. There is a lot of benefit that you get from how you structure the dollars that you want to give and how you actually move them through these different tools and vehicles that Lee has shared that also allow you to gain benefit personally in terms of relieving tax burdens and so on and so forth. So I would suggest that hopefully at some point you all may want to do a little bit of a deeper dive around this topic and get people a little bit more comfortable we can certainly share some of the information that allows you to understand dive with the wealth strategist to walk through some of that a little bit further. I did want to make sure that we got to one of the questions, the last question that was here in the chat, Lee, before we wrap up today. So the question is, and it's a great question, the question is, does Bank of America or similar businesses who offer, you know, DAFs or donor advised funds, do we recommend certain nonprofits as part of our service or part of our advice, if you will? Do we recommend certain nonprofits to our clients for their donor advised funds? So do clients come to us and ask us, who would you suggest given this purpose or given this passion that I have? And if so, this is the great part about the question that I love. If so, how would one's nonprofit become part of our suggestion pool? So in other words, how would Spelman Alumni Association become one of the consideration sets that we might offer up if in fact that's a role that we play? And if so, how would you go about putting your charitable organization or one that you care about into the consideration set?
That is a great question. And the short answer is yes, we do recommend to our clients a short list of donor advised fund providers that do include, we call them third party providers, the likes of a National Philanthropic Trust is on our list, and they're a national provider. But in addition to that, while that is our short list of third-party providers, when we are working with a client and they say, we want to set up a donor advised fund, but we are interested in it meeting certain criteria. And one criteria may be geography. I want a donor advised fund provider that, again, I'm just going to use Atlanta. Or they may say, I want a donor advised fund provider that aligns with my commitment to Spelman and also Atlanta. Well, we would provide them who all of the donor advised fund providers are that would include the likes of the Spelman Alumni Association, DAF, a community foundation, so then they can choose. So what the bank does say is that if we are making recommendations, we have to at least recommend 3. So that we are, if you will, giving the client some diversity, but we're also not recommending just one provider for consideration. So I would say the short of that long-winded answer is all we need is to know that you all have a donor advised fund, and then Tiffany and I can share that with our colleagues, and it can be part of our conversations with our clients. It is that easy. It doesn't necessarily take an extensive vetting process because, again, it's at the discretion of the client for them to choose which donor advised fund provider they want to consider. So hopefully that answers that question. And Tiffany, I wanted to go back to the conversation around private foundations to just add one nuance. I have experience with clients, whether it be prior to the bank or working at the bank, that a private family foundation or private foundation will be dissolved by its creators when the family or its members that set it up are in disagreement at one point in time. So what I have found is that family dynamics, sister dynamics, brother dynamics, and define sister or brother any way you want will cause a family to say, because we can't agree on who's going to be the decision maker, what the mission of the foundation is, or anything else, the foundation gets dissolved because of those dynamics. So I would say to any of you all that are considering a private foundation, that being on the same page from start to throughout the evolution of the foundation will ensure its success and sustainability. If there is any type of disconnect amongst the, if you will, those who govern the foundation, that foundation is not going to flourish and survive, and it's going to be more painful than anything the IRS will ask you to endure to set it up. So I agree with you, Tiffany. If there is broader interest in setting up a private foundation, we should definitely do a deep dive, because the administrative piece, in my view, it may be weighty, but it is not as weighty and important as making sure that the dynamics of the creators are in sync.
That's right. That's right.
I have a question for you, Lee, and this gets back to you can give more than just cash. And you mentioned artwork, but we didn't hear the details of how that works in terms of who's actually valuing, setting that fair market value for the asset. Is that on the person that's donating? Is it on the receiving organization? And how does that piece work?
I think both Tiffany and I can answer this question. We've been through a few journeys in helping institutions to think about leveraging their art to create liquidity. And when you are donating a piece of art, the not-for-profit will ask you if you have an appraisal of that piece. And they should ask you that because they should assess whether they want to accept it or not. So that is part of their gift acceptance process. And they should have a gift acceptance policy on file that says this is an asset that we can accept. On the not-for-profit side, they then have to do their own assessment of the art to essentially determine, one, are they going to evaluate it, assess it for its value? And then once they do, are they going to keep it or are they going to sell it? And sometimes institutions will choose to keep the artwork because they expect that its value is going to be higher over time. So it is a bit of a process. And Tiffany, I'm going to hand it over to you because you've done a really deep dive in helping individuals and institutions to really think about gifting art.
Yeah. It's just like owning art, right? There's a bit of a risk associated with it. And it really depends, Adrian, on the charitable organization as to what their preference is around their inventory. Some of them have a strategy. We have clients that have strategies that anytime they receive something that's not that is not liquid. So anytime they receive any donation that's not cash or it's not securities or stocks, that they will immediately turn around and sell it because they don't want to hold the asset They don't want to manage the asset. They don't want to be responsible for keeping up with the appraisals and the insurance and so on and so forth. Especially, I mean, artwork, when you talk about maintaining artwork and keeping it, think about, you got to keep it in the right climate controlled, atmosphere, environment. You got to put insurances on it. I mean, that comes with a level of maintenance and expense that a lot of organizations don't want. So many of them will take, unless it's an organization where art is somewhere in their mission or somewhere in what they deliver community, oftentimes they will look for the valuation coming in the door, they'll flip it around, sell it, and use the cash for their purposes. Same thing, Adrian, with things like real estate or land. I mean, people gift those types of things all the time also. And if it's a situation where the organization is a small nonprofit, they don't have a lot of staff, they don't have a lot of budget to be able to maintain those things, then oftentimes as soon as you give it, they're putting it on the market so that they can liquidate it, get the cash, and then they move on, and it's a good contribution. But on to your point, on your side, for your own tax purposes and reporting purposes, you would need, whatever it is you're gifting, you would need to have the appropriate appraisal documentation going in, because that's what you will use with your accountants to be able to get some type of tax credit or benefit for that contribution.
Yeah. And Tiffany, I love that last point because when the not-for-profit appraises the art, the IRS accepts their appraised value, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
And many people have got into trouble because they have gifted a piece of art. They've said, oh, the value is $1 million. But then the not-for-profit said, well, it's only worth $250,000. The IRS does not believe you. They believe the not-for-profit, because they're the one who is accepting the gift and accepting the proceeds of that gift.
Right.
And that's what's really important for you to remember about anything that you are gifting to a not-for-profit. It's not what you appraise it at, it's ultimately what the nonprofit says that they are going to accept as the value for the asset that you are gifting.
Great. Well, ladies, this has been another fantastic session. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I like how you started off talking about giving, caring, and sharing as we talk about philanthropy. So Lee, thank you for joining us. Tiffany, thank you. And we will see everyone back here for our last session in June, where we will put all of these pieces together and just come prepared with your questions on any of the sessions that we've done this far, and let us know where you still need to fill in a little bit of the gaps or have a few other additional things that you want to know about. So until then, you all have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.